I was just imagining in those moments, the last moments of those terrified people who they had no guns to defend themselves. They were civilians, elderly, women, children. Some of them had their hands bound behind their backs. Some of the women were raped so badly their pelvises were broken, and there's no way of describing that. But I wanted to show the world that this actually happened and that we should all be speaking up and mourning these people, because there hasn't been a mourning process for these victims.
As IDF forces are trying to get the hostages back, there's still around 130 hostages still inside Gaza that haven't been released.
It's not an easy task to cover what's happening in any war. And at Rebel News, we promise to bring you the other side of the story. That's one of the reasons my colleague Avi Yemini went down to Israel shortly after the Hamas terrorist attack on that nation that took place October 7th. That's also why I'm about to bring you an interview with Oli London, an activist and political commentator who just got back from Israel last Thursday. He wants to shed light on some of the things about the war that you won't see covered by the mainstream media, and you certainly won't find it circulating or dominating TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook. If you want to know more about the other side of the story of the Israel-Hamas war, we have a special website called thetruthaboutthewar.com. And for now, here's Oli London. Oli London, back on Rebel News. We usually see you for your activism. This is a little bit more relative to your political commentary. You took the trip to Israel to shine light on the other side of the story. Thanks for being back on Rebel News.
Great to be back. Thank you.
Now, you put up some clips on your social media. A lot of it is very interesting. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions about it, starting with a very sort of chilling moment where you're about 2 kilometers away from the Gaza Strip and you're doing some commentary about what you're hearing, what you're experiencing, and you have to take a moment of silence. I can see you almost look a little overwhelmed with the situation. Let's show a clip of that. And then when we come back, tell us what was going through your mind and what you were experiencing and hearing at the time.
And very, very heavy bombing right now. This is the risk you have to take to report on the ground so the world can actually see what happened.
So as I was visiting kibbutz Kfar Aza, which 62 people lost their lives, including children, including elderly grandparents. It was a real horror show. I visited these houses. I could still smell the human flesh after 2 months, despite the fact that morgue workers, Zaka, which is the volunteer force, medical force, had cleared the bones and body parts. They had tried to decontaminate the area. You can still smell the flesh. So it was really horrific. And as I was trying to take in this scene and try to imagine what these families went through, you hear the constant shelling and bombing, which was, the Gaza border is just 2 kilometers away from this kibbutz. And, I had to take a moment to pause because it was really overwhelming, because firstly, I was thinking of, these families in their last tragic moments. And then, you're hearing these bombs, and even though the border was a few kilometers away, it does sound a lot closer. If anyone's been in a war zone before, it's very, very close. And it was very heavy bombing. And of course, the IDF were taking out Hamas tunnels and Hamas targets where they store rockets, and also Hamas were firing back. But it just made it more real. It's like, I've just been in these houses and then you're hearing the bombing. This is real right now. And there's been a lot of tragedy surrounding this. So, my heart was with those families on that fateful day on October 7th when that happened.
Talking about things being more real and the smell of human flesh, even today, or basically last Thursday when you were there. Take us back to when you're inside of a bomb shelter. What happened to the family that was in there?
Well, every single house towards the Gaza border, they do have shelters which are actually for rocket attacks. So every day Hamas fires rockets into Israel, and while the Iron Dome is very good at intercepting these rockets, sometimes they do hit civilian buildings and kill people. So Every house has one of these shelters. But the tragedy of this October 7th attack was that these shelters are only designed for rocket attacks. They're not designed for terrorists coming to homes. So there was no lock on the inside of the doors. And there was also a lever on the outside of the doors for emergency services workers to normally open the door if somebody is injured. And so basically, Hamas would throw gas canisters into these houses to burn them down, to either burn the families alive or force them to flee outside as they're on fire before massacring them. So that was really, really horrifying, because all you see in the house is just ash. The floor is covered in ash. You see the broken glass from the windows. The whole roof and ceiling is completely gone. The walls are blackened. It was worse than any horror film anyone could imagine. And, I was just imagining in those moments that the last moments of those terrified people who they had no guns to defend themselves. They were civilians, elderly, women, children. Some of them had their hands bound behind their backs. Some of the women were raped so badly their pelvises were broken. And there's no way of describing that, but I wanted to show the world that this actually happened and that we should all be speaking up and mourning these people, because there hasn't been a mourning process for these victims. The day after this attack, pro-Palestinian activists were on the streets of Toronto, of New York, of London, celebrating what happened. So, I wanted to show the world that this is still a very real tragedy and we should be mourning these victims.
Yeah, and that celebration was taking place before Israel even defended itself for the attack. So important to notice. Now, as we're filming this interview right now, I believe there's still 137 hostages being held by Hamas terrorists. When you were down there, did you have any conversations with any of the few who were released in an exchange for Gazan prisoners, or I should say prisoners who are Gazan? Or did you talk to any family members of hostages in general?
Yeah, so I met survivors of that day. I met family members of victims. One story that struck me, I spoke with Daniel, whose brother Elia Toledano was kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. And, Daniel has been through hell and back, but he's, trying to remain positive that his brother is keeping a positive spirit under the tunnel of Gaza. And he was just explaining that Elia, his brother, was such a positive guy. He was at the music festival. He loved to party. He loved to socialize, drink, listen to music. And he's praying that he's still keeping that positive spirit alive, because what these Hamas terrorists do to the hostages, they have this psychological manipulation on them. They tell them that nobody's coming for them. Nobody wants them. Israel has given up on them, or they're going to bomb them. So the hostages are told that every day, so it must be unimaginable. But, Daniel is not giving up hope. He's fighting every day. He's speaking out. And, it was really tough to hear his story, but I wanted to speak to him so I could share it with the world.
What's something, now that you've gone there and come back, or some things that you think are by far underreported about this situation, this conflict there?
Well, something you won't see in the mainstream media, they always talk about Gazan people having to be displaced, which, of course, we know a lot have had to go to the south to refugee camps. But, they don't talk about the fact that there are around 300,000 Israelis that have been internally displaced from the south near the Gaza border and also in the north. And one thing people don't realize is Hamas obviously operates in Gaza, but Hezbollah that operates in Lebanon actually has even stronger capabilities. They have a rocket arsenal of 200,000 rockets. They have the capabilities of firing 4,000 rockets into northern Israel every single day. They have around 30,000 combat trained soldiers at their disposal. So that is a serious concern. And I was just a few kilometers from the Lebanese border with Lieutenant Colonel Sarit Zahavi, who is a lieutenant colonel in the IDF reservists, and she was just explaining the situation in the town just below where I was standing. 60,000 people have been evacuated, and she was explaining how Hezbollah fire rockets daily. They're also planning an attack. They've been planning for many years an October 7th style attack. So, thankfully there are 2 IDF battalions there right now, and you have guard posts of soldiers every couple of kilometers. But unfortunately, it's just a matter of time before Hezbollah, which has greater capabilities than Hamas, does make an incursion. So, a lot of people have been evacuated. They're living in hotels, living in people's houses right now. And One thing I'll say is the spirit of Israeli people. I met professors, I met doctors, I met teachers that had given up their jobs temporarily to volunteer in logistics centers to get supplies to evacuees, to get them warm thermal clothing for the winters. And the Israeli people are very strong.
Yes, they are. Well, thanks so much, Oli London, for coming on Rebel News and telling us what you saw when you had your boots on the ground.
Thank you very much, Drea. I appreciate it.
If you appreciate our coverage of the Israel-Hamas war and the boots on the ground information you receive, like you saw in this report, go to thetruthaboutthewar.com to find out more and to chip in a few bucks to help cover our expenses to bring you reports just like this.